On the evening of January 12, 1975, 23-year-old nurse Corinne Eileen Campbell walked through the lobby of the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass Village, Colorado. She excused herself, saying she would retrieve a magazine from their room. She never returned. The next month, her frozen body was found near Owl Creek Road, a cruel testament to murderous violence. The man suspected of her murder was Theodore Robert Cowell, later known to the world as Ted Bundy. He was handsome, polite, intelligent. Women trusted him. America admired him. But behind the smile was a darkness no one had yet understood. This is the story of Ted Bundy, the charming killer who fooled a nation. And long before the bodies, the headlines, and trials, his story began here. Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, gave birth at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers. He was taken in by his grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, who raised him while telling him his mother was his older sister. The arrangement concealed a deep secret, that his true mother was Louise, not Eleanor the sister. That confusion of origin planted in Ted a fragile sense of identity, shame, and secrecy. In the early 1950s, his family relocated to Tacoma, Washington. At school, he appeared polite, bright, but distant. Classmates described him as awkward, trying to fit in, yet never truly belonging. At home, he watched and absorbed an environment that sometimes fractured under rage. His grandfather Samuel allegedly displayed aggressive behavior. Such an atmosphere may not have created a killer, but it shaped the wiring of one. The secrecy, the lie of family, the hidden father, all of it built a foundation of emotional instability that few adults noticed. Ted started working early, delivering newspapers, odd jobs, skiing instructing. On the surface, the promising teen. But beneath different impulses, he would break into cabins on ski trips, leave small traps or holes in the snow for classmates. Animal cruelty followed, mice pitted against each other, small acts overlooked. He developed a fascination with violent crime, reading books on murder, studying law enforcement techniques. And he watched. Who notices who? Who complains? Who is quiet? He once entered the University of Washington. In those years, he changed his name legally to Theodore Robert Bundy, after his stepfather, Johnny Bundy, adopted him. He excelled academically, yet remained socially disconnected. Others remember him as a man volunteering at a suicide hotline, offering help, while his mind prepared for something else entirely. But beneath the quiet exterior, something was growing, a pattern of secrecy, a fascination with power, a young man who wanted to be trusted, and then didn't want to be contained. A few more years, a few more women, and then things changed. Psychologists who later interviewed Bundy described the chilling combination of traits he carried. An ability to present charm, friendliness, and normalcy while harboring deep disregard for others' suffering. Evidence of narcissistic personality patterns, grandiosity, need for admiration, envy, and a fragile self-esteem. Evidence of antisocial personality traits, lack of remorse, callousness, deceitfulness, and willingness to violate social norms. He once said, with chilling calm, that he could lie, charm, manipulate, because people simply believed what they wanted. These features were ignored. His teachers saw a promising youth, his peers saw a kind face, but no one saw the predator in camouflage, and the warning signs. They were all there, yet they were overlooked. Ultimately, his childhood, his confusion of identity, his secret life and analgesic of power would cost dozens of lives. He seemed like a man on the rise. A law student at the University of Washington, active in political campaigns, assisting at a crisis hotline, Theodore Robert Bundy was building a public persona that earned trust, admiration, and respect. Yet beneath the neat appearance, his life was split between two worlds, the polite, driven young man and the predator lurking just out of view. At the start of the 1970s, Bundy impressed his peers. He volunteered with Seattle's suicide hotline, appeared warm, charismatic, and did well academically. He even dated Elizabeth Liz Klopfer, a young secretary and divorced mother, whom he met at a bar in 1969. Liz believed he was a kind and genuine partner. In 1973, he graduated with a degree in psychology and enrolled in law school. He appeared to be someone destined for success, articulate, good-looking, and seemingly grounded. Many around him saw a future leader, a man who could help others, a man who cared. But while the world applauded that image, there was another side gaining speed. In his past, Bundy nurtured anger, frustration, and a need for control. When his childhood girlfriend Stephanie Brooks ended their relationship, it wounded his ego deeply. Some researchers say his later victims matched her appearance. Young brown hair parted in the middle, a symbolic link to his rejection. With each failed relationship, the mask of respectability slipped a little more. He began acting out in secret, peering into windows, breaking into cabins during ski trips, stealing items without motive, behaviors noted by psychologists as early indicators of deeper pathology. By the mid-1970s, Bundy's outward life and hidden life were diverging sharply. He showed a growing fascination with power, control, and the unseen fear he could evoke. He behaved like a man who believed normal rules didn't apply to him, and the world simply hadn't caught on. Investigators later noticed an eerie pattern in Bundy's victims. Young white women, often in their early 20s, with long brown hair parted in the middle. Why this type? Some psychologists believe Bundy chose them because they resembled his former girlfriend Stephanie Brooks, either consciously or unconsciously. It was obsession disguised as attraction. Bundy's charm made him blend in. Volunteers saw him helping others, friends saw him as dependable, strangers saw a friendly face. Few realized that the image of kindness was a disguise and that the man behind it was selecting his victims like targets in a game. Women began disappearing across multiple states, Washington, Utah, Colorado, and still, no one suspected the clean-cut law school student who volunteered in the community. How could they? He looked just like them. He sounded just like them. It was the perfect cover, until one mistake changed everything. It began to look like terror walking across America. Young women vanished, late nights, quiet parks, or busy dorms. The trail of fear stretched from Seattle to Utah to Colorado, and yet the man behind the smile remained free. This is the phase where the story of Ted Bundy became a pattern of disappearance and dread. In early 1974, in the suburbs of Seattle, Washington, the first clear wave of disappearances hit. Young female students were missing without trace. While investigators worked, the public remained in disbelief. On June 11, 1974, 18-year-old Jorgen Hawkins of Seattle, Washington, left the university district late at night and never returned. Her case would later be tied to Bundy. Later that summer at Lake Sammamish on July 14, 1974, 23-year-old Janice Ott and 19-year-old Denise Naslund disappeared while sunbathing and chatting with friends. Witnesses later described a young man carrying books, a cast, and a skateboard, a move to appear harmless. Bundy's tactics were becoming refined. He frequently posed as a disabled man, using a cast or an arm sling, asking for help loading something into his Volkswagen Beetle. The victims came forward willingly. Once isolated, they rarely made it back. In October of the same year, in Utah, 17-year-old Laura Ann Amy disappeared from Lehigh and was later found murdered in American Fork Canyon. Her body was one of several discovered in remote locations, revealing the extent of Bundy's travel and reach. The murders crossed state lines: Oregon, Idaho, Utah, and Colorado. Investigators began to see patterns, similar victim types, young women with long brown hair parted in the middle, similar cars, similar decoy routines. Bundy's method was deceptively simple. He impersonated authority. He pretended injury. He asked for help. When his victims helped him, they walked toward their end. When the public thought they heard only a friendly request, they were stepping into danger. One example, in Murray, Utah, on November 8, 1974, 18-year-old Carol DeRanch was approached by a man wearing a sling, claiming her car had been damaged. She invited him to her car. He then handcuffed her. She escaped. Her description of him and his car, the Beetle, with torn upholstery and minimal disguise, became one of the first real clues. Bundy's mobility gave him power. Interstate travel, changing states, changing names. He avoided detection in part because he didn't fit the stereotype of a serial killer. He looked like a date, a friend, a volunteer. Investigators later described him as the man who hid inside normality. The 1970s lacked the forensic tools we use today. DNA science was in its infancy. Missing young women were sometimes dismissed as runaways. A handsome young man driving a Beetle asking for help, few suspected danger. Meanwhile, Bundy's charm worked in his favor. On dates, volunteering, helping colleagues, he built a reputation as safe, trustworthy, upstanding. The police sketch in Washington eventually described a stranger with brown hair, a cast, carrying books. But the public's disbelief, serious guy like him? Impossible. Delayed action. As more bodies were found, investigators realized a network of missing persons tied them to one man. But by then, Bundy had moved again, to Colorado. And then, someone survived. Someone looked him in the eyes and knew his name, and the machine of law enforcement began to move. It started as a simple traffic stop, but it would unravel the facade and set a course for justice. In August 1975, Utah Highway Patrol Officer Bob Hayward pulled over a tan Volkswagen Beetle in the pre-dawn hours near Salt Lake City. Behind the wheel, Ted Bundy. The front passenger seat was missing. In the back, hidden beneath the seat, investigators found a ski mask, a handmade mask from pantyhose, handcuffs, rope, trash bags, an ice pick, and other items linked to abductions. At first, Bundy claimed the ski mask was for skiing and the handcuffs belonged to a friend. But Detective Jerry Thompson recalled that this description matched the 1974 attempted kidnapping of Carol DeRanch, the first survivor of his attacks. The breakthrough came because of detail and persistence. The note in his apartment marked the Wildwood Inn in Colorado, the same site where nurse Corinne Campbell had vanished. Finally, the man who once channeled trust and kindness found himself the subject of sketches, witness statements, and car descriptions. The public began to whisper. The police began to move. From Washington to Colorado, a pattern emerged. The same VW Beetle, the same type of victim, the same tactics, the same man. Witnesses described a young man with a cast, carrying books for help. Investigators cross-checked the vehicle. They matched the face, the documents, the travel timelines. A lineup in October 1975 changed everything. Carol DeRanch identified Bundy as her attacker. He was rearrested. Still, he remained polite. He remained charming. In the interrogation room, he sat calmly, answered questions fluently, a young man who looked like someone you'd call when you were in trouble. Law enforcement officers who later interviewed Bundy remarked on his composure. He behaved like a lawyer presenting a case of his innocence. He questioned witnesses. He refused to break. He prolonged the investigation. He understood his image. They called him a wolf in a suit, someone who looked harmless until faced with his evidence. In March 1976, Bundy was convicted of the aggravated kidnapping of Carol DeRanch and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison. But he refused to remain behind bars quietly. In June 1977, He escaped from the Garfield County Jail in Colorado. 6 days. On the run. Free. December 1977. He escaped again, this time from Glenwood Springs, Colorado Jail. It was his final flight before Florida. Each escape renewed his freedom and his threat. Each time the authorities closed in, he turned loose once more. Investigators realized they were chasing a predator far more dangerous than they had imagined. Because Ted Bundy wasn't just traveling, he was evolving. His movement between states, his changes of appearance, his calm demeanor, all became tools to stay ahead. And by the time police finally connected all the dots, he had moved again, this time to Florida. January 15th, 1978. Tallahassee, Florida. It's just past 2:45 a.m. Inside the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, most students are asleep. But before dawn breaks, 4 young women will be attacked. 2 will never wake again. The man responsible walks quietly through the dark, his confidence unnerving, his rage controlled. He was Ted Bundy, escaped fugitive, master of deception, and America's most wanted man. After his second escape from a Colorado jail in December 1977, Ted Bundy vanished. He stole a car, crossed state lines, and headed south, leaving behind a trail of witnesses but no clear trace. He used fake IDs, adopted new names like Chris Hagen, and drifted through Florida undetected. He rented a room near Florida State University, living quietly and trying to blend in. Bundy looked harmless, a slim, well-spoken man with a smile that disarmed strangers. But inside, his anger was building. He had lost control of his life and was running from everything: the law, his own failure, and his craving for power. On the night of January 15, 1978, Bundy entered the Chi Omega house around 2:45 a.m. He moved from room to room, attacking 4 women in their sleep. Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy were killed. Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner survived with severe injuries. Police reports say the entire incident lasted less than 15 minutes, but it shocked the nation for decades. Bundy left almost no trace, but witnesses heard footsteps and a door slam. One woman saw a man leaving the house carrying a club. The next morning, Tallahassee police arrived to a scene that seemed impossible. A quiet college home turned into a crime scene by a man who once dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Just hours later, Bundy attacked again, this time near FSU, where he brutally assaulted Cheryl Thomas, a 21-year-old dance student. She survived, but the violence left her with permanent injuries. By February 1978, Bundy had driven north to Lake City, Florida. There, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach was taken from her junior high school in broad daylight. For 7 weeks, her family and police searched desperately. When her body was found in April, the nation's heart broke. It was the crime that sealed Bundy's fate. On February 15, 1978, police in Pensacola stopped a stolen Volkswagen Beetle. The driver resisted arrest and gave a fake name. Inside the car, officers found multiple stolen IDs, credit cards, and odd items like women's pantyhose with eye holes cut out. It didn't take long for the fingerprints to confirm it. The man they had just arrested was Theodore Bundy. As the news spread, reporters flooded Florida. The handsome killer who escaped twice was now caught for good. But before justice could be served, the world was about to see Bundy transform his trial into a stage. He had fooled friends, police, and even the nation for years. But in Florida, Ted Bundy was out of moves, and yet he wasn't done performing. The courtroom would soon become his final act. He had escaped twice. He had crossed state lines. He had fooled investigators for years. But now, Ted Bundy was finally in handcuffs, and instead of hiding from the spotlight, he stepped right into it. What followed wasn't just a trial for murder. It was a performance. In June 1979, Ted Bundy stood trial in Miami, Florida for the Chi Omega murders. It was the first televised murder trial in American history, and Bundy knew exactly what that meant. Millions were watching. Instead of showing remorse, he smiled for the cameras, adjusted his suit, and greeted reporters as if he were a celebrity walking into an interview. Bundy insisted on representing himself, dismissing parts of his legal team. He was charming, articulate, and confident. Everything that made people underestimate him years earlier. But this time, that same charm came off as arrogance. Reporters noticed how he enjoyed the attention. He objected dramatically in court, questioned witnesses, and smiled when cameras turned his way. Behind his polite tone was a man obsessed with control. Control over the narrative, control over the image the world saw. Psychologists later described his trial behavior as performative narcissism. Bundy wanted to outsmart everyone, prosecutors, jurors, even the media. He believed he could win by persuasion alone. He wasn't defending himself to save his life. He was defending his ego. Prosecutor Larry Simpson recalled, "He thought he was the smartest man in the room, but all he did was help us prove who he really was." The case against Bundy was powerful. Investigators presented bite mark evidence found on victim Lisa Levy that matched Bundy's teeth perfectly. One of the first times forensic odontology was used in a major case. Witnesses described seeing Bundy's distinctive Volkswagen Beetle near the sorority house. Survivor Carol DeRanch also testified, identifying Bundy as the man who tried to kidnap her years earlier in Utah. Despite Bundy's courtroom theatrics, the evidence was undeniable. Something strange happened during the trial. People became fascinated by Ted Bundy. Women showed up to court, saying they found him attractive. He received fan mail and marriage proposals from strangers who refused to believe he was guilty. When asked why, one young woman told reporters, "He just doesn't look like a killer." And that became part of the tragedy. Society's tendency to mistake appearance for innocence. In one of the most shocking moments of the trial, Bundy proposed to Carol Ann Boone, a former co-worker, right in the middle of court. He declared her his wife in front of the cameras, taking advantage of a Florida law that considered a public declaration of marriage in court as legally binding. Boone smiled, and Bundy acted as if it were a victory. But the world saw through the act. It wasn't love. It was manipulation. It was his way of staying in control, even behind bars. On July 24, 1979, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty on all counts. Bundy was sentenced to death by electric chair. But as the judge read the sentence, Bundy's composure cracked for a moment. His voice trembled. The reality of losing control, of facing the end, finally reached him. Judge Edward Cowart, before passing the sentence, told him, "It is a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity as I have seen in this courtroom. You are a bright young man. You would have made a good lawyer. But you went another way, partner." Those words captured the paradox of Ted Bundy. Intelligence without conscience, talent without empathy. Bundy had lost in court, but he wasn't done talking. In the years that followed, he would use interviews, appeals, and manipulative confessions to keep the world watching. As the countdown to his execution began, Ted Bundy finally started revealing what was inside the mind of the charming killer. January 1989. Florida State Prison. The world waited outside, holding signs, chanting, celebrating. After more than a decade of lies, trials, and terror, Theodore Robert Bundy's time had finally run out. But before he faced the electric chair, Bundy had one last performance to give. Ted Bundy spent nearly 10 years on death row, using every legal appeal he could find to delay his execution. He became known as the Master Manipulator, charming even his jailers, negotiating interviews and speaking as though he were still the smartest man in the room. But as his final days approached, Bundy began to crack. His once confident voice became anxious. The charm was fading. He could no longer control what came next, only the story he would leave behind. On the eve of his execution, Bundy began to talk. For years he had denied everything, insisting on his innocence. But now, with death hours away, he began to confess. Slowly, deliberately, as if he wanted to remain in charge of the truth itself. He admitted to over 30 murders, stretching across multiple states: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida. But investigators believed the real number was much higher. Bundy himself hinted that there were many more. Women whose names would never be known, whose families would never find closure. In one of his final interviews with Dr. James Dobson, Bundy tried to explain his crimes. He claimed he was influenced by violent pornography, saying it created a compulsion that led him down a dark path. But psychologists and investigators weren't convinced. They saw it as yet another manipulation, an attempt to shift the blame and rewrite the narrative one last time. Experts described Bundy as having antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic traits, and psychopathic tendencies, an inability to feel empathy or remorse. He enjoyed power, not pain, control, not chaos. For Bundy, murder was never about anger. It was about dominance. He wanted to decide who lived, who died, and how the world saw him. Even in his final moments, Bundy avoided naming every victim. He offered fragments, vague details, partial truths. Investigators described it as a final act of cruelty, denying closure to the families who had waited years for answers. But across the country, people began remembering the young women whose lives he stole: daughters, students, sisters, friends, each with dreams that ended too soon. As Bundy's name filled headlines, many urged the world to remember them, not him. On the morning of January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was led to the electric chair at Florida State Prison. He wore a blue denim shirt and looked calm, eerily calm. His final words were, "Jim and Fred, I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." At 7:16 a.m., the switch was pulled. Outside the prison, crowds cheered. People held signs reading, "Burn Bundy, burn." Fireworks went off. Reporters described the scene as a mix of relief and celebration, a nation releasing a decade of fear and anger. But not everyone celebrated. Some stood in silence, reflecting on what had been lost, not just lives, but innocence, trust, and faith in human nature. Many of those who worked on Bundy's case admitted he haunted them long after his death. They called him a walking contradiction, intelligent but empty, polite but cold. FBI profiler Bill Hagmaier, who spoke with Bundy in his final hours, said, "He wanted to be remembered as something more than a killer, but that's exactly what he was." Ted Bundy's execution ended a chapter, but not the fascination. Books, documentaries, and movies would follow, each trying to understand how an ordinary-looking man could hide such evil behind a smile. But the truth remains chilling. Ted Bundy didn't look like a monster, and that's what made him so dangerous. He's gone. But the echo of his crimes still whispers through history. Ted Bundy didn't just leave behind a trail of victims. He left behind a warning. A lesson about how evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it smiles. Ted Bundy wanted to be remembered as someone extraordinary, and in a dark, tragic way, he got his wish. But the real lesson isn't about him. It's about the innocent lives taken, the families forever changed, and the haunting reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. If this story opened your eyes, remember to subscribe to Crime and Conscience for more real stories, where every crime leaves a lesson and every conscience faces a choice. Every story leaves a stain, some on the streets, others on the soul. You've just watched another episode of Crime and Conscience, where every crime reveals a truth and every conscience faces a choice. If this story made you think twice about the faces we trust, don't just scroll away. Subscribe and turn on notifications. because next time we'll uncover another real story that will leave you questioning what you thought you knew about good and evil. Remember, behind every headline, behind every name, there's a conscience whispering. This is Crime and Conscience, the truth behind the mask.